All right, let's get to it. But actually, I've got a little surprise, because it's not just about Alexa and inaccessible websites. It's also about how to work on a side project when you've got a 6-month-old baby. And you'll understand why I want to talk about that. But first of all, why I took this project on. So essentially, I saw this message from someone who is completely blind, who sent a message on an Alexa developer group on Facebook. And I'm not going to read it all, but essentially they said they can get the news from all over the world and they can get national news, but they can't get the news from their local community. And essentially, this website exists, but their screen reader system can't read the website. And that's mainly because the websites aren't just accessible. They're not very well designed, they're not very well developed, and therefore the screen reader just can't read them. I saw that post and I was like, maybe I can do something about it. Like, I've done web crawling before, I've done Excel flash briefings before, so why not? And then I took a step back. So in September 2020, I became a dad. A month later, I bought a house, and I moved house, and I was about to start a new job. So I kind of thought, maybe it's not the right time to take a side project on. And actually, I thought, well, actually, no. It saddened me that someone can't just get access to local news. I've done web crawling, I've got an Excel flash briefing. This is totally fine. So, why can't the screen reader work out this website? Yeah, it is called JavaScript for Babies. It's actually valid code as well, like it's excellent. She is 1 day old with that, in that picture. Anyway, this is one of the websites that the person who I'm doing that project for sent me. And then I quickly understand why the screen reader can't read the website, because it looks awful. Yeah, I had a little cry, I think, when they sent the website, because I was just, yeah, this is painful. But I had a look around. I used something called Axe, which is a developer extension, like a DevTool extension that you can install on your web browser that scans the website for accessibility issues. There's a couple of them around which are very good. There's Wave and there is Axe. Definitely use them, like if you're a web developer, because they can just give you very quick tips about things that you should fix on your website to make them accessible, which is really good. A couple of other things as well, which popped to my mind, is that there's no RSS feeds on that particular website, and actually on any of the one that that person was trying to use. RSS feeds are great for people with disabilities because there's no worry about how it looks, it's just about the content. And they are brilliant at just basically giving the content back to people. But actually, the way on why the screen reader wasn't able to read the content, it was just a convoluted tab navigation. So I don't know if you've ever tried to navigate through a website just using tabs, but some of the websites that do it well, when you tap once, they have some things that pops up and say, skip to main content. You press on it skips to everything else, and then it focus on the main content. Essentially, the screen reader reads what you're focusing on. So if you're focusing on a bit of advertisement, because that's actually what it's doing on that website, then you're going to tab, and you're never going to reach the content. And actually on that website, you can't even tab to the main content, which is just not good. So, quick thing though, because we get into it too much. one thing that I realized working on this project is that it's not really a big problem for like global and national news, mainly because there's many ways to get access to global and national news, the tellies, radio, like anything you want. There's multiple like news providers as well. You've got much choice. And also they're not bad in terms of accessibility. I mean, the BBC is great at it, for example. But in general, the big news provider have got money to spend on that kind of thing. They've got money to spend on tech. The local news provider don't have money to spend on tech at all. And actually, it's quite a bit of a problem in terms of accessibility, because accessibility most of the time requires a bit of thinking. It should not, but it does, which means that local news provider often get it wrong. So let's make a start then. How did I manage to get all the content from this website and get Alexa to read it? Well, the first thing was to find the right time to work on the project, because of course, many things going on, was about to start a new job, had a little baby. So finding time was difficult, but actually, my daughter and my partner went to Saturday swimming lessons. I can't swim, so I've kind of avoided that, although I would have probably quite liked that. But essentially, it was a dedicated and predictable 45 minutes every week of focus time in like a cafe nearby. And I want to really insist on the dedicated and predictable, because it made me like just really like gave me the ability to work on that project once a week, small chunks of time, but without like compromising any other stuff. Like my daughter and my partner were like busy doing other stuff. I had the time to do it, time for myself. And I want to really insist on that for a side project, it should be on the side. It's not something that should parasite your normal life. So let's get technical then. Can they be scraped? The first thing that I realized, that person lives in the US, and they sent me 3 websites, one which you've already seen. This is the second one when you try to access it from the UK, because of GDPR and EU cookie law, and because the US don't care about that at all. So, which means that essentially some of the websites in the US, especially the one who their main target audience would be people from the US, they're not going to bother about GDPR and EU cookie law. So they just give you a block, a door, and you can't get into the website. It's easy enough to get around, like you can use a VPN. And in terms of code, then you move your infrastructure to the US, that's fine. But it really surprised me, because I think in the UK, we're just so used of seeing the cookie banner, clicking on accept, and that's fine, you're in, that here it's not even an option. It's like, no, you don't get in. Okay, so I made a few assumptions when I started to work on the project. I was thinking, okay, HTTP requests are going to be enough to get the content, and that means the content is not loaded using a convoluted JavaScript framework. And I don't need to have essentially a headless browser to access the website. I can just make a curl and get the content. But the second assumption, which was that all articles from the same website share the same layout. And that means that the sport article and the article about, I don't know, road blockage or roadblocks because of construction work all are sharing the same layout. So if I want to get the title, I can do the same code to get the title on these 2 articles. And then the third one was about the fact that all the websites have a list of most recent articles. So like they have a page which I can go to and find the list of most recent articles. And surprisingly, one of these websites doesn't have that. So there's no page where you can find the most recent articles. Which sounds mad for a news website, but anyway, I want to give a shout out to Alistair from Bounce, who is expert Googler and find a hidden XML file on that website, which essentially holds the list of the most recent article. So shout out to him. Okay, who in the room knows about XPath? Yeah, quite a few people, cool. So XPath is essentially a querying language that you can use to, I guess, travel through the structure of an XML document, and an HTML document being a sort of XML document. Then essentially you can use XPath to travel through the DOM and get the content that you want. So essentially what you can see here on the screen is a few XPath query that I've used to get, for example, the first one is get the title of an article. No, actually it isn't. It's to get the link to an article. So I'm getting all the anchor document that have got a class named module item title. And that gets me all the anchors, which are all links to articles. The second one is about getting titles. Third one about getting author. And the fourth one is about getting the main text. I've got a little bit of a surprise at the end. So if we've got time, I'll play a bit with XPath on the Async website. Okay, cool. Then the scraper. The data flow is very simple. Essentially, for each article, you get to the page which holds the list of most recent article. You get that list through XPath. You loop through the links. You go to that page. You get the content, and then you store the content. That's simple. But it's not that easy. Because I think something which I found while doing that project was really about how do I balance the complexity of hard coding everything or making some configuration files so that I can reuse some of the code, or do I just make something super powerful which allow like code in the configuration file, which I've seen done before, which is fine, but then you ended up evaluating and executing code that's not in code, which is not great. So in the end, I went with the approach which you can sort of see on the screen, which is to have one configuration or like one schema of configuration file, and then having different bits of codes for the different websites. Which means that essentially, I'll go one ahead, the configuration file looks like this. You can see the main URL of the website. The collection link is how to get the list of most recent articles. The collection XPath is the link to all the articles. And then the next 5 things are about getting data from the article page. The provider is what website is it coming from, but as a key. I'll talk about what that key is important in a second. And then the readable source, we actually ended up not using, but it's about just giving something to Alexa that she can read. And essentially, what you can see here, which is the crawler factory, is reading that provider key that I was talking about in the configuration file, and then decides which code to execute based on that key. It's sort of similar to something called the factory method pattern, but in a very loose implementation of it. Cool. And so we've got articles in the database now. So we're going to think about how we will give these articles back to Alexa. And actually, before kind of making even that decisions, something I wanted to talk about with that person was whether it was the right thing to do. And essentially, I said, well, there's also methods that you could get access to these articles. I can send them via emails. I can send them via Facebook Messenger because it was what we were using to talk together. I can make an RSS feed with this article. I can make a new accessible, very minimal website, or I can do other stuff. And essentially, we went with the Alexa flash briefing, and the main reason we did that is because that person has a habit of getting their news from an Alexa flash briefing already. So they're getting all their global and national news from an Alexa skill briefing. For example, in the UK, it could be BBC. But that behavior from the customer or from the user was basically not going to be disrupted if I just add a new flash briefing to their habit. So for me, it was quite important. It comes with some limits, which we'll talk about. But it was quite important for me to just not break that habit, not break that behavior. So Alexa flash briefing. They're a bit different to what is commonly referred as a custom Alexa skill. A custom Alexa skill is essentially just an app for Alexa. So you design your conversational dialogue, you design your code, and you handle every single thing of what's happening. So you give it an invocation name, which could be EDF. So I used to work for EDF, so invocation name would be EDF, and then the user say something like ask EDF about something, and then you basically get to something, and based on that, you do some stuff, and you create a response. An Alexa flash briefing is different because Alexa, or like Amazon, handles every single part of the conversational model. You have no say in that at all. Essentially, the user is saying, Alexa, what's my flash briefing? And Amazon gets a ping to a feed URL that you define, and then it reads the content. And that is it, essentially. So everything about knowing if the user has already read the article, everything about like going to the next article or stopping, you don't have a say on this. Amazon handles it, which is good because it means that I didn't really have to write custom logic about this. This is already done, but comes with some limits. From a behavioral point of view, I think there's a limit that Alexa will only ever read 5 articles at a time per feed, which mean that if you've done a set of crawling and you found 10 new articles, then the user will lose 10 because Alexa will only read the last 5. I think it was a trade-off that the customer was happy with and was comfortable with. I wasn't particularly happy about it, but there's not many ways to go around it. You can have multiple feeds per flash briefing though. So when I say max 5 articles per feed, it's actually max 5 articles per website. So they could get 15 articles, which was nice. The other limit, there's many more limits, but one of them, which is important, is the 1 second feed response. If your feed at any point takes more than 1 second to reply to Amazon, Amazon just invalidate your skills. And they're very brutal about it. The condition for the flash briefing is that 24/7, it should reply under 1 second. And I'll come in a minute about why I think this is important. But nice diagram. This is more or less the infrastructure that the whole project is using. We have got 2 AWS Lambdas, one which gets the content from the website. It runs every 3 hours. And then store any new article in a DynamoDB table. And then every 15 minutes, Amazon caches the result of the feed. So essentially, they ping for the 3 articles the API gateway, which is serving that AWS Lambda, which reads the content from DynamoDB. So read the article. Amazon caches it every 15 minutes, but actually that's That's not a massive problem when your content runs every 3 hours. And that is it, more or less. Oh, no, actually, that's not it. Because I made that project for someone else, not just for me, I also really wanted to have some sort of system in place so that I could know if things were going to go wrong. So I set up two things. I set up essentially a Slack reporting channel, which pings me every time an article fails for some reason. So like, for example, if an article has no date, I can't really do anything with it. So it fails to be inputted, so I know about it. And then if there is a code failure, I get just a bit of an email from a CloudWatch alarm. And the reason I wanted really to do that is because I do that for someone else. So if it goes wrong, then I should really try and fix it. Different tools. In terms of coding, the whole project is more or less in, not more or less actually, it is all in infrastructure as code. There's a tiny bit of Terraform for the DynamoDB. The AWS Lambda are deployed using serverless. The code is actually written in Ruby. I'll come back on Ruby on Lambda in a second. It will get interesting. And then the Alexa flash briefing is deployed using the Alexa skill kit CLI, which is not really made for Alexa flash briefing skill, but you can go around it and make it work. Okay, so a few things I learned while working on that project, which I think are worth sharing. Very technical one to start with, single table design in DynamoDB. Now, I've been a developer for about 10 years, and most of my career I've worked with relational database, so things like MySQL and Postgres. And NoSQL is a bit of a thing that I don't really know how it works. And so when I used DynamoDB before that project, I used to put everything in DynamoDB, not worry about partition key or sort key or whatever, and just make scan requests to get the content out of it. The problem when you do that is that essentially it's the same as looking for a book, a specific book in that pile. And that's because the partition key and the sort key are very, very important. When you want to query, so to get data out of DynamoDB, the best way to do it is to query, not scan. And the difference between scan and query is essentially this. This is how you query something. So if you know a book and you know the author, you know in which bookshelf you're going to look, because there's going to be a big letter sign on top of that bookshelf. And then with a bit of luck, they're ordered. And it's exactly what you should be doing when you design your table in DynamoDB. And so for this project, essentially, the way I'm querying the data out is by knowing which website I'm currently wanting the data from, and then getting the most recent articles. So the partition key is the same thing that the provider that I was talking about earlier in the configuration file. So if the name of the website is I Heart Oswego, it's one word, all lowercase, I Heart Oswego. And the sort key is a bit of it's a combination of two things, but essentially it's the date of the article. So that when I query the article for I Heart Oswego, I can just say, get me what the query looks like, partition key, I Heart Oswego, and then the sort key just get the last 5 articles inserted in the DB. If you want to do that by just scanning, essentially it's slow because the DynamoDB have no concept of what you're looking at unless it's sorted. So yeah, I learned quite a lot about this, and I learned how to actually use DynamoDB rather than just inputting things on it randomly. Okay, next thing, running Ruby on AWS Lambda. This is from the documentation of AWS, which says you can run Ruby code in AWS Lambda. Well, great. Sorry. So it was great. I wanted to learn Ruby because I was about to start a job in a new company, never done any Ruby. The backend is in Ruby on Rails. So I thought, I'll do a good thing. I'll do a bit of prep work. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to do Ruby on AWS Lambda, where I could have done TypeScript or Python, which works well on AWS Lambda as well. Just don't do it. Okay, more seriously though, so there is some gray, very little line about running Ruby on AWS Lambda. By default, only the standard library and AWS SDK are supported and are given into the runtime, which means that if you want to use any other library, you need to create a deployment package that's compatible with the AWS Lambda runtime. And if you want to do that on your Mac, you need Docker, because you need to download the AWS Linux image and then run your code on it, package it, and then re-uploading it. So just don't do it. There's better tool for it, like Python or JavaScript runs much better on Lambda. I learned a bit about copyright law, because going into that project, I was like, yeah, I'm taking stuff off website, but is that okay? And I'm lucky enough to know a few people at Amazon, so they would know about that, surely. So I asked them, and they basically said, it's fine. And that's basically what they said. Yeah, it's fine. It's very much a gray area anyway. But no, essentially they say it's fine, just cite the source and the author of the article before it's read. It's very important. Also, essentially don't DDoS their websites, just query it nicely, not every second. You can't use the name of a website as the name of the skills. You can use it in the feed name, but not as the name of the skill. And then you can't make money out of it. I was like, fine, that's cool. Okay, come back to working on side projects while having a 6-month-old baby. Yeah, the dedicated set time is super important. I think that's the thing which made that project go so smoothly for me, is that predictability, that I had those 45 minutes to work on it. That doesn't mean that all the time I had those 45 minutes, I made a commit. Sometimes I just had a nice coffee, had a piece of cake, and never actually got started. That's fine. Or sometimes I just banged my head on the problem, and that was also fine. Don't do it after your day job. Your day job is already complicated enough. Rest after your day job. That's what you need to do. Or come to Async. Prioritize quality time with your loved ones. I don't really need to say it, but actually it is important. It's not your job, so don't treat it as a job. I think one of the things for that project is, from the very beginning, I was very honest to the person I worked with, and I was like, look, I don't really have much time to work on this. So I'm not going to make you pay for it, because I can't promise when I'm going to deliver that thing. It's going to be done in chunks of very little time. So, it's not my job, so don't treat it as a job. And also, I think you don't have to have a side project. And I think we're quite guilty as a community of developers to always want to have side projects. And I really want to say, you don't have to. It doesn't define you as a developer to have side projects. It's cool, you can showcase things, you can learn things, but only do it if you want to. Don't do it because everyone else is doing it. Okay, so how did it go after many hours, or many 45 minutes of coding? Well, the most important thing is that my daughter is much better at swimming than I will ever be. She has completed all the stages of the infant water safety training. Woo! No, joke aside, it took 11 months to complete. That's a lot of 45 minutes. It's actually not a lot of hours if you combine it. But also, I say 11 months, that's 11 months from like the first message to actually releasing the thing in production on the Alexa skill store. It took a lot less time to code and to get a fully functional beta. It took me a long time to motivate myself to get into the copyright and the distribution issues, mainly because of the beta system, which allows you to give the skill to a person for 3 months, and you just have to renew it. But at some point I was like, yeah, it's probably not sustainable at the end, so let's actually sort these issues. 15,247 articles as of last night, probably a few more today. But yeah, quite cool. I talked a little bit about this already, but yeah, it did not cost me a penny. I did not make money out of it. That's also excluding coffee and cake, of course, because I'll probably spend quite a bit of money on coffees and cakes. It doesn't cost anything. Also, the architecture has a cost. It has a cost about like $6-7, I think, per month. That's mainly the DynamoDB table. That cost is absorbed by AWS credits, which Amazon gives you if you've got a live Alexa skills that is in production and used by at least one person. So every month I get $25 of AWS credit, which essentially goes to pay this, which is quite cool. 0 outage. Some failed articles, of course, but the skill has been up since a bit more than a year now without any outage, which is cool. And one very happy customer. I say customer, user, that's, you know. Honestly, that makes me happy. So like, if there's anything about that project, which I want to highlight, is that, you know, it's not necessarily about like websites should be accessible. Of course, it should be accessible. I should never have to do that kind of project in the first place. But I'm very happy to have been able to use my skills from my career to help someone just have a little bit of something more in their life. So I'm just happy about this. Okay, so what's next? She can code. No, she can't. Okay, so me and the guys from Bounce have tried to make a bit of a project out of this, or a product out of this. We called it Voice News, and essentially we wanted to see whether some local news provider here in the UK would be interested to use the exact same platform and put their content on a flash briefing skill. We haven't made much effort to try and sell it, but essentially we don't have any customer, so we're open sourcing the code. So we're not doing it just yet because there's a bit of housekeeping to do, a bit of cleaning, a bit of removing some keys in the code and stuff like that. But keep an eye on the GitHub of Bounce Technologies, because essentially all the code that's powering that project will be open source, and you can use it to transform your favorite website into an Alexa skill if you want. Just a bit before we finish, a bit of a shameless plug. We're hiring at BridgeU. We've got about 5 roles in the dev team, 1 data lead, 2 mid-level backend engineer, 1 senior backend engineer, and 1 engineering manager. They're not all on the website, but if you're interested, come speak to me. I'll be happy to talk about it. And the other thing is Hey There, which is a new product from Bounce Technologies, which is about making introductions in communities. So if you're looking after a community of people and you want a tool to help you introduce people to each other, then Hey There is a product you're looking for. So again, if that sounds of any interest, come speak to me. Okay, have we got time for a strip write? Yes, okay, cool. So let's do that. So I played a bit with the Async website earlier, which is this website. Because I thought maybe I can just like reuse the same code and do like a Alexa flash briefing skill of the async events. Yes, that would be good. Thank you. All right. So first thing we need to do is get the list of links to the events. So in the console, at least in Firefox, but I'm sure that in Google it works as well, you can use $x to execute some XPath queries. And so if we have a quick look at, let's say, this, which is a link to the event of tonight, we can say that it is inside an H3 element, and it's inside an A. So maybe we can do something like look at all the H3 and the following A, and then see what it gives us. And so it gives us a list of 278 links, which is probably a bit. So there's also some meetup links in there. So we'll get them out of the way. So we can do something like not contains, and then we'll use the add class. Yes, I can, absolutely. Is that okay? Class, and then let's get rid of meetup links. That's not going to escape. Let's do that. All right. We've got a list of 228 link, which at first glance look like it's right. So I'm going to keep that in mind. And then we're going to go to a particular article, so the one from tonight, for example. And let's say we're just trying to get the title of the talk tonight. So we'll do the same process. I'm looking at it. We can see that it's an H2. I'm making a wild assumption that there's only one H2 in the page. Oh, but no, there isn't. So then again, like you can specify things. So you can use a class attribute and say that it's equal to heading, which I think is the right one. And then you get your rights content. So this is more or less how you can like get your XPath, or how you can use XPath to target particular content. So of course, I've cheated a little bit because I've done that in advance. And I filled everything that I need from my configuration file that I showed earlier. And I've made, not that. I've made a DynamoDB, which, has already got articles. It's already running. Let's delete them. I've got a DynamoDB, which is empty now, a DynamoDB table. And I've got my Ruby code, which is not particularly pretty, but which will run. Actually, let's look a bit at the code because it's interesting. I was talking about the factory pattern earlier. This is what it looks like with just one configuration. So essentially, if your provider is async, then you use the async meetup scraper to fetch the articles. And then you do some things which the article, against it needs a lot of cleaning up. But essentially, when this runs, so I'll run it manually. Okay, success, excellent. We now have our articles in the DynamoDB table, which means that in the feed, which was empty, We can, come on, maybe? Loading. Okay, I might bypass that step and try anyway. We have got a flash briefing for async, which that essentially is, taking the URL from the feed, adding async.js at the end so that it knows which article to get. So again, that is that partition key I was talking about and the provider thing. And I will give that another go. It doesn't seem to work. Okay, let's try anyway. So I have configured my Alexa to know the flash briefing from async. So it's demo time. Alexa, what's my flash briefing?
Alexandra, you're already caught up this evening. I'll start your flash briefing again from the beginning. From Async Meetup. Alexa to the rescue of inaccessible websites, written by Nicol on February 2nd, 2023. The web is over 30 years old, yet some websites are still not accessible. This is the tale of how Alexa, with a little bit of help.
Stop. Just to show you what it looks like, this is a feed that Alexa's reading. Alexa flash briefing, I've got a limit which I forgot to mention, is that it will not read anything that's more than 7 days old, which is why it's ignoring all the other article because I've based the date on just the date of the event rather than anything else. But